All right, so then moving along here to Rudolf Steiner's discussion. This is his fourth lecture in his discussion of the Gospel according to John. This is Rembrandt's Raising of Lazarus, and this lecture is primarily devoted to a discussion of the symbolic spiritual significance of this event. Before doing that, though, I'd like to make a couple of my own observations. I find it interesting that the four evangelists have the four tetramorphs, but that the tetramorphs, the four animals, actually three animals and one human that they're associated with, date from the period of when the precession of the equinoxes was in Taurus in 4000, between 4000 BC and 2000 BC, when civilization was invented, when it was coming into being. So we have Luke associated with Taurus at that time, and then Mark with the lion, with the summer solstice, which would have been for that period. And then instead of the Scorpio, we have the eagle, but Aquila for John. Aquila is the constellation that's located above Scorpio. And then we have the water bearer, Matthew, the man, whose gospel, as Steiner points out, is the most human, I think, of all four of the gospels. I find that interesting. Also, it's interesting, too, that when John introduces Christ, who just shows up, he calls him the Lamb of God, which would associate him with the age of Aries, and then he immediately baptizes him, basically transforming him into a fish. So moving thus into the age of Pisces, which is where the procession will go for the next, roughly the next 2,000 years. I also find it interesting, too, that the first two disciples are Simon Peter, and Peter's name means the rock, as everyone knows, and his brother Andrew, and Andrew simply means man. So it's like, once again, it's another astrological reference. It's the Gemini, because with the Gemini, one dies, and one's mortal and one's immortal. The rock is, of course, a symbol of immortality, and the man dies. The man is a symbol of mortality. So interesting how I'm 100% certain that these astrological structures did not creep into these texts by accident. These guys knew what they were doing, and John was a very, very sophisticated, spiritually sophisticated writer, as the following discussion, Steiner's discussion, will show here. So note that, so Steiner says there's exactly 21 chapters here, and that the raising of Lazarus occurs dead center in the middle, chapter 11. And there's even a kind of, so we have the events before the raising of Lazarus, and then the events that come after the raising of Lazarus. So the gospel is neatly divided into two halves, and it's even punctuated. The last paragraph of 10 says, "And many came to him," to John, "and they said, John did no sign, but everything that John said about this man was true, and many believed in him there." And then the second to the last paragraph of the gospel kind of echoes that. "This is the disciple who is bearing witness to these things, and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true." So in both cases, there's this affirmation of truth, as though to punctuate the two hinges here. All right, so then the significance of the raising of Lazarus. So Steiner is talking about how in the ancient initiations, with the ancient mystery cults, the process of initiation would be where an individual would be put aside somewhere, in an enclosure, a temple, or a cave, someplace for 3.5 days. In the case of Lazarus, it's rounded off to 4, but close enough. 3.5 days. And what happens is that the astral body has to develop organs of spiritual perception during that period in order to peer into the astral plane. Just as light creates the eye and sound creates the ear, so too does this temple sleep, and it's kind of a sleep-like death that the initiate is put through. Sort of like at night when our astral bodies and egos leave our physical and etheric bodies behind, and we travel into the astral plane, but we don't have, normally we don't have the developed organs for perceiving it clearly and remembering it. During the initiation process, what happens is that spiritual organs of perception are awakened in the initiate's astral body, and then these have to be imprinted on the initiate's etheric body in order for them to sink in, but the etheric body has to separate. from the physical body. It has to not completely, or the person actually dies, but it has to sort of loosen up from it so that it can be imprinted with these faculties by the astral body. And then, so when the initiate comes out of this death-like sleep from this enclosure of 3.5 days, now this individual can perceive the spiritual world. He or she can perceive the gods, the realm of the gods. And so what Christ is actually doing here, what John has him doing, is that he's making public the mysteries. For the first time, he's making a public demonstration of what has hitherto through history been kept secret. Those who were initiated in the Eleusinian mysteries, it's very common knowledge, did not talk about them, and no one ever did. I think Aristotle even was initiated into them, not a word from him. The utmost silence was enjoined on such initiates, just like in Stanley Kubrick's film Eyes Wide Shut. He has an echo of this when the Tom Cruise character goes into the sex cult, the Bacchanalian sex cult, and he's warned not to speak a word about what he has seen there, otherwise bad things will happen to him. That's kind of an echo of how this was in the ancient world. You did not tell people what was involved in the mysteries, otherwise they wouldn't work. The whole process of them working is that you don't know what's going to happen. You have to be put through a process where there's an element of surprise and an impact upon you that awakens these subtle organs. But so here Christ, for the first time now, is now making these public. He's demonstrating the mysteries in a public fashion. And so in the events the first 10 chapters, which sort of jump around a lot. I find John, let's say in contrast to Mark, to be not that great of a storyteller. Mark tells an excellent story. He starts in the north, in Galilee, and he follows the course of the river down, and it ends with the climax with Christ riding on a donkey into Jerusalem to cause trouble there. John has him jumping back and forth between Judea and Galilee, all over the place. He's not much of a storyteller, but he's a metaphysician. It is the most profound of the Gospels. And so the events before the raising of Lazarus mostly consist in Christ giving these theological discussions to his disciples, and of the Pharisees questioning him constantly. Who are you? Who do you think you are, healing someone on the Sabbath? You can't do things like this. And then after this section with Lazarus, they begin persecuting him in earnest. And so it's really divided into these two halves. And then so with respect to John, John the Baptist is the forerunner. He says one will come after me. And Steiner says that when they ask him who he is, and he says, I'm just the voice of one crying in the wilderness, that it's actually mistranslated. The word eremit, in other words, hermit, it should be translated as, I am the one who is in solitude. I am the solitary one, because John the Baptist represents the beginnings of the whole point of the mystery of Golgotha and the incarnation of Christ is the sundering of the individual from the group soul. So we've had, according to Steiner, throughout history, all these group souls, whether it's the Hebrews, whether it's the Akkadians, whether it's the Sumerians or the Egyptians, everybody is part of a tribe. And if a crime is committed against your tribe, it doesn't even matter who avenges it. It's been a crime against the group soul. So we have all these different group souls warring against each other. But the whole point of the Christ event is to sunder the individual from the group, from the blood. This is a religion of credo in which one says, I believe. I am, not we believe. So it doesn't matter who you're descended from. This is why at the marriage of Cana, when Christ's mother comes to him and says, we're out of wine, and he says, woman, what have I to do with thee? What he really means is the emphasis is not on our blood relationship now. We are relating to each other as individuals. Elsewhere in one of the other Gospels, he says, he who does not leave his father, his mother, his brother, and his sister is not fit to follow me. In other words, no more group soul. We're now thinking of ourselves as individuals, and it will become the karmic task of the West from this point on to develop the idea of the individual as a metaphysical species unto himself. That will become the task of the West, and I believe that this is the reason why reincarnation was anathematized at the Second Council of Constantinople in about 554 AD, I believe it was. Father Origen had it early on, but it was anathematized because it really would have gotten in the way of the West's development of the sense of the ego, the development of the ego. That had to be solidified and stabilized first, before, with Rudolf Steiner, reincarnation, which is a fact, could be brought back in, so that we have this balance between karma on the one hand and freedom of the will. Karma says that certain things will happen to you. Freedom of the will is how you're going to respond to those things, and how you respond to those things then determines the karma of your future lifetime, and so on. So it's a process, a big one and a long one. So then, the only people who could see the gods in the age before Christ were people who were initiated into the mysteries and who had these faculties through various processes of meditation or yoga or concentration, awakened these faculties in order to be able to perceive the gods. So now what Christ is doing is democratizing this so that everyone can now see God, the Word made flesh, in human form. For the first time in actual physical form, everyone can see this being now. That's the crucial thing now, this democratization of the mysteries. And the raising of Lazarus is a sort of miniature version of what happens to Christ at the end. The women go to the cave there, and he's gone. He's been resurrected physically. The body is not there. Same thing here. He's foreshadowing what's going to happen at the end here with the raising of Lazarus. This public demonstration of the mysteries. And so that's Steiner on Steiner's fourth lecture here on the Gospel according to John.